So in terms of due diligence, I'm going to focus mainly on pre-seed and seed stage businesses. For your kind of Series A businesses, so £3 to £10 million checks, that's obviously a lot more detailed and typically more outsourced due diligence. But in terms of pre-seed, which could be anything from kind of 50k up to maybe £1 million at the top end, and seed, where there's a bit of overlap, probably kind of £500,000 to 2 to 3 million, the due diligence process tends to be a little bit lighter, and there is quite a wide span of what you'll get depending on the funds that you're speaking to. Different funds and different angels, and it's not necessarily true that angels do less due diligence than funds. They usually just do different due diligence. The first thing that will probably happen will be customer calls. So everything that you guys say to an investor, that investor will want to do some sort of sense checks to make sure that that's equally how your customers or potential customers understand the product. Different investors will do that in different ways. So some will ask for introductions to existing customers if you've got them. Some will have their own kind of network that they try and tap into of people that would potentially be customers. And they're really asking a question of, what's the problem? Who else are you looking for in this space? If it's an existing customer, what has attracted you to using your business as opposed to another business? How does the price point triangulate? Interestingly, in my experience, most customers end up telling the investor that the product's too cheap, which is actually great feedback when that makes its way back to the company. But yeah, just trying to get a full 360 view. And I think one of the important things is you can get stuck in a little bit of an echo chamber in a business, and actually an investor coming in and doing that due diligence to really sense check what your customers want is actually quite useful, not just for their due diligence, but for them in terms of how they help you post investment if it's someone that's going to come on the board. And equally, you should always ask your investor, are you able to get a copy of that due diligence, because there's some great stuff that will probably be able to feed back into your business plan and the internal data that you use. Your second piece will usually be around financial. So if it's a pre-seed business, there's not really much financial due diligence that you can do. Ultimately, you've got a model, an investor will sit down with you and try and kind of kick the tires on the assumptions, but you've not really traded for long. There's not a lot of kind of outsourced financial due diligence that an investor could do at pre-seed, and ordinarily they just won't. Once you get into seed, depending where you're up to, it may be that some of that's outsourced. That could be as light touch as if you're an enterprise SaaS business that's got 5 or 6 customers. It might be reviewing the customer contracts, working out what's recurring, what's software licenses, what's services. So that could be as kind of light as it goes and not necessarily kind of drilling down as much into the numbers. If you've got a complex balance sheet, so you've got kind of various loans on there, then they may look to do a bit more of an assessment into that. So it can be bespoke for different businesses, but the financial side should be relatively light touch. We'll kind of come back to bigger themes at the end, but this is probably a useful point to say. Just make sure, however you're presenting your business, it can be substantiated, because the whole purpose of due diligence is, 1, to check what you've been told, but 2, to just kind of reinforce the trust and credibility from the founders. So I always say, don't spin something up too far to the point where it's not defensible. Appreciating financial models are look forward. So, there's a bit of unknown in there anyway, but certainly the look back numbers, they need to be kind of absolutely nailed on and should stand up to quite a bit of scrutiny. Other due diligence, again, is kind of different for different providers, but technology due diligence is coming up more and more now. So at Series A, you'd expect someone to almost do a full kind of code review, how you work, or audit of team practices, workflows, all that other stuff. That's probably not going to happen at pre-seed and seed. But what I've seen quite common now is an investor maybe works with a similar company in their portfolio, and they'll try and bring their CTO in, usually at kind of low or minimal cost, just to spend a day or kind of 2 days with you in your business to understand a little bit more about the tech, how it's architectured, what's it built on, what language is it built in, how easy is it to employ people with that skill set. So again, really useful exercise, especially for founders, because that's usually a business that's a little bit further along commercially. So that could be a good sense check of how do you get ahead of the curve there. Cyber due diligence is another one. Insurance tends to come up a little bit now. That's usually not one that you need to prep too heavily for ahead of time, because if you fall down on any of it, it's relatively easy to resolve that. Obviously the stuff that I talked about at the start is a little bit more fundamental. And then legal due diligence, which again can be some of the kind of contract checking. It can be looking at employment contracts, understanding the terms of founder agreements, things like that. And then if you've got any kind of partnerships, franchise agreements, key suppliers, that again will typically get rolled into legal DD. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. Like I say, different investors want different things. Try and get some advisors that can really help with that. It doesn't necessarily have to be people on the kind of payroll, but if it's other founders or places like Funded where we see a lot of businesses raise, you can then start to build a picture relatively early of the investors that you're speaking to. What does their due diligence process look like? Because it's different for different people. But yeah, the biggest takeaway pre-due diligence, just make sure everything that you say is substantiated, there's data behind it, and you're not going to get caught out.